Shabbat Shalom. Every year on the 4th of July, I have a little tradition that I do that I've done for about 13 years now. I go online and I find the most over-the-top, silliest American picture that I can find. Usually it's like George Washington riding an eagle as red, white, and blue flames emerge from behind him. And I take that picture and I post it on the Facebook page of my dear friend Rabbi Natasha Mann, who is British. She's currently a rabbi serving in London. And I usually write something underneath it, like over-the-top American slogan. Usually I type something like, "You can't handle this much freedom." Sometimes I write, "Happy 4th of July, redcoats." Another popular one is, "We threw your tea in the harbor and we'd do it again." One of my personal favorites, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that we kicked your tuchus." I do this every year. It's my own little holiday tradition. And every year she just politely takes it. That's what British people do when you insult them. They just sip their tea with their finger up. Oh dear. Every year. Well, a couple weeks ago, Rabbi Natasha texted me very excitedly. She had just recently seen the Broadway musical Hamilton because it was playing in London. And my first thought was, Hamilton is playing in London? Now that is ironic. And it really is. By the way, Hamilton is such a popular musical in England that they said Prince Harry went and saw it a couple months ago. Apparently they even invited him on stage and he gave it rave reviews. What an interesting time to be alive. Anyway, Natasha went and saw this musical and she told me that she loved it. And one of her texts said, quote, "As I was watching it, I thought to myself, they should become independent. Down with Great Britain." And apparently she was so into it, she said, "Jonathan, when George Washington appeared on stage, I let out a gasp." Oh. Now, I've got to admit, I've never seen the Broadway production of Hamilton. Not really because I have anything against it, but I just always thought it didn't sound like something I'd be into. But if my British friend was so moved by it that she now agrees with our independence, I thought maybe I ought to check this out, so I did. If you've never seen it, this musical obviously chronicles the life of Alexander Hamilton, America's first Secretary of the Treasury, who was eventually killed in a duel by his longtime rival, Aaron Burr. Now, I'm a pretty big history nerd, so I had known about Aaron Burr way before the musical, but if I had to guess, I would assume that most people only know the name Aaron Burr because of this play. And if they know anything about Aaron Burr at all, they probably only know him as the guy that killed Alexander Hamilton. But it turns out that Aaron Burr was a lot more than a killer. In fact, did you know he was actually vice president of the United States? And what's even weirder is that he was vice president while he killed Alexander Hamilton. Like, he went, had a duel, shot one of the founding fathers, and then went back to the White House and finished out his term as vice president. Apparently you could do that in 1804. He was never arrested, he was never brought to a trial, and he never publicly expressed any remorse. He just shot the former Secretary of our Treasury and then went on being vice president. And by the way, Aaron Burr lived a long and healthy life. He died at age 80, which might not seem like so old now, but in the 1800s, that was really, really old. They didn't have proper medical care. Being 80 was quite the milestone. Now, I mentioned earlier that Burr was much more than a killer. He actually did quite a bit in his lifetime. He served with distinction in the Revolutionary War. He became one of New York's prominent lawyers. He became a pioneer of modern political campaigning. He even helped secure the Thomas Jefferson presidency. And after all of that, he went on to become a leading advocate for women's education in America. But now, nobody remembers any of that. They simply know him as the guy who killed Alexander Hamilton. Speaking of killers, our Parshat for the week is named after one, Parshat Pinchas. Last week at the end of Parshat Balak, we heard the story of Pinchas taking a spear and violently stabbing an Israelite man and a Midianite woman who were preoccupied with one another in the tent. Our Parsha this week begins with Pinchas receiving the Brit Shalom, which is what God calls the covenant of peace, which is essentially a reward for his obedience, for taking action when no one else would. Now, the rabbis and the sages are quite uncomfortable with this. After all, how can a murderer receive such accolades when the Torah literally tells us, "Thou shalt not kill"? This is a topic of much debate in the Talmud, and Jewish tradition has continued to debate it for millennia. But what if I told you that the Pinchas story did not end in our Parsha? It's true. Later in the Tanakh, in the book of Joshua, Pinchas is sought out to adjudicate a case between the eastern and western tribes of Israel. We're told in the book of Joshua that the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh had settled on the eastern side of the Jordan River, but before returning home, they built a massive altar. Now, when the western tribes saw that altar, they immediately assumed the worst. They said, they're starting a rival religion. They're rebelling against Hashem, and they did what people have always done when they're convinced that they're right. They got ready for war. An entire civil war amongst our people was about to erupt, not because of something that had actually happened, but because of an assumption. And this is where things get interesting. Who do they send to investigate this matter? That's right, our friend Pinchas. The same Pinchas who had once picked up a spear and acted impulsively and violently is now in the book of Joshua adjudicating a major case. Only this time he doesn't pick up a spear, thankfully. Rather, Pinchas asks a question. He listens. He gives the other side a chance to explain themselves. And the eastern tribe answers him. They say, no, this isn't an altar for sacrifices. It's a witness, a reminder that even though the Jordan separates us geographically, we are still one people. And Pinchas hears them, and he accepts their explanation, and he goes back and he reports the truth. The war is averted. Thousands of Jewish lives are saved because one man chose conversation instead of violence. It's one of the most beautiful moments in the life of Pinchas, but nobody names a parsha after that. Friends, I'll tell you something you probably already know. Nobody remembers Pinchas as a peacemaker. We only remember Pinchas as the guy with the spear. And unfortunately, that's oftentimes how memory works. One act of violence can eclipse a lifetime of goodness. One terrible decision can become the headline that swallows every other chapter of a person's story. Aaron Burr was a soldier, a lawyer, a vice president, an advocate for education, and yet history says, sure, but he's the guy who killed Alexander Hamilton. Pinchas stopped a civil war, preserved the unity of Israel, and modeled careful listening, but we still say, yes, but he's the guy who stabbed them with the spear. Now, to be clear, this isn't an argument that violence doesn't matter. Unfortunately, we all know that it does. We all know that actions have consequences, and the Torah doesn't pretend us to ask otherwise. But it does challenge us to think about a deeper question. Are we allowing one moment, good or bad, to define an entire human being? Because if that's how we judge others, we shouldn't be surprised when others judge us that same way. Every one of us has chapters we'd rather not have read aloud. Every one of us has moments we'd hope won't become our entire legacy. The gift we owe one another is the willingness to remember that no life fits into a single headline. Pinchas was much more than a spear. Aaron Burr was much more than a duel. And each of us is more than the worst or even the best thing that we've ever done. So as we celebrate our nation's 250th birthday in Shul this morning, let us remember that the greatest victory in Pinchas' life wasn't the day he picked up the spear, it was the day he put it down and listened to his kinsmen. America has always been a nation that believes in second chances, and Judaism has been a religion that always believed in teshuvah. Dear friends, may we all earn our own brit shalom by choosing conversations that heal over actions divide. May God bless this beloved synagogue, and may God bless America. Shabbat shalom.